Go to now Dr. Ramel Smith, who has been watching this also unfold. And when we see the stories coming out of Minneapolis, when we saw that video that was just so gut-wrenching for so many people, that really provoked this visceral response, how are you seeing people respond here in Milwaukee to this another outrage of a black man dying?
Well, yes, I mean, the way they're responding is the way we always respond to it. You know, it's pain because you personalize it so quickly. Just as a human, you see a human suffering, but automatically you put the place of your loved one inside of that. But I think mostly what people see is that was so symbolic of what America has been to the African American community. And that's the white man's knee on our neck. It's like no matter what you try to do, you just feel though you just can't get over that hump. The great father of critical race theory, Derek Bell, says the more things have changed, the more they stay the same. Malcolm X stated, I think, the best. He said, just because a knife has been removed 6 inches from your back, if it's been placed in 9 inches, it doesn't matter. And I think sometimes we see the tremendous progress that's been made by the African American community, and we think, wow, we're doing great things. But at least what Martin Luther King said, justice too long delayed is denied. And what we see in that thing is justice delayed. If that had happened with me, I would have been arrested right away, and the 3 people who were with me would have been arrested as accessories, party to a crime. And so when we see the ability for people to be able to get away with crime in broad daylight and to have the audacity, the brazenness to do this in front of the camera, then you combine that with the false police report that was written by those officers, even though there was conflicting video evidence, it lets us know what we're up against, and the fear that if these things, these atrocities are not videotaped, those things that happen to us that go undercover and that are not recognized and brought to justice.
Yeah, Dr. Smith, I appreciate you bringing up that sometimes we think, is progress being made? What is happening in our communities? And especially in this pandemic, COVID-19, we've seen the disparities among African Americans, people of color, battling this issue of COVID-19 and the access to health care, the access to good paying jobs, the access to good health care. And then in the middle of this, another reminder of what the black community, what the black and brown and people of color have seen over decades of what's happening in cities like Milwaukee and now in Minneapolis. I mean, I can't imagine a more stressful time for African Americans, and now seeing this happening on the news and in what's happening around the country. But do you sense from people that the outrage is equal among folks, and it's not just, as you look at these demonstrators, we're seeing, you know, people of all race, and we're seeing a number of people who are young as well. They want their voices to be heard, and this is a good way to exercise that.
Yeah, Charles, you know, that's a great point, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think when anybody sees this, you know, anybody with a heart, any type of emotion are outraged. But if you remember, like the Dr. Martin Luther King speech of 1967, when he spoke on NBC, actually, he was asked that same very question that you just asked me. And he said, you know what? He said, I have to say this. No person wants to see a bull, a dog stuck on somebody, or a water hose stuck on somebody. They're atrocious. But he said, when it comes specifically to the liberal white American who thinks that they are, you know, privy to what's going on, they really don't want equality for the regular black person. They just don't want to see these gross inequalities to happen. And that's what we have to look at, because most of the time when you have a good person, they don't want to see anyone killed. They don't want to see anyone hurt. But when it comes to true equality and those things you talked about, those negative social determinants that unfortunately Milwaukee, Racine, Kenosha, Southeastern Wisconsin leads the nation in, nobody is doing anything to really make a great effort against. We understand what our issue is with infant mortality, with low birth rate, with underemployment, with unemployment, with prison incarceration, with education, yet these issues still continue to persist. So yes, you are correct. People are outraged by this specific incident because it's so outrageous over the top. But what we would love to see is that same outrageousness, that same love and content, that effort to make a system change to stop the systemic oppression that we deal with every day.
Yeah, and Dr. Smith, I hear you there. I've been, reporting for many decades in this community, and I keep saying, where is the change? I do see some change. I do see some progress. And then once again, we're hit with a situation like this that says, why is this still happening? And what other change is going to be needed that will finally say, you and I no longer have to have this conversation, that we can be talking about those other things, that progress is being made. And do you have that one solution, that one sort of like, how do we get there? Because I've been asking this question for many years.
You know what? The solution is simple. The application of it is what's very difficult.
Yep.
What we have to understand is, as a psychologist, when people come in and ask for help, the first thing what I tell them what we have to do is there has to be a level of self-introspection. That means I have to understand what's good about myself and what's not so good. So those things that's not so good, I can change. So America has to do the same thing. We have to ask ourselves what's not so good. And what we have to do is recognize that America was built on the legacy of stolen land and on free slave labor. And for America, a capitalistic society, to sustain itself, it needs to still work on slave labor. And even though we don't call slavery the same way or see it as we did before, we still have slave labor, and slave labor comes in all different color hues of skin. That's when we see the level of income inequality. So what do we need to do? There needs to be a complete restructuring of America. There needs to be a complete level with the income distribution. Now, many people who are in the status quo will be very much against that because they don't want to change their way of life. But whenever you look at any great society that's ever existed, it's always been corrupted. It's always fallen because of greed. And if America thinks that she is not capable of falling like every great empire from Rome to Egypt to Russia to China, then they're greatly mistaken. And if we don't change our ways, we will self-destruct.
I like to believe we are capable of change. Dr. Smith, thank you for your time. Stay with us here as we continue to monitor this developing story. We're going to take a quick break.